wrote a book about his life that he's given to his kids. I said, Boris, I want to buy your book. Give me your address because I'll write you when we're done. When we get home, I want to read your book. I said, because my family had, my father and mother had friends who had survived the Holocaust that we knew when we were growing up here.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So those were the. Yeah.
The October 16th meeting of the Eden Prairie City Council will now come to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Prior to the start of each council meeting, we have an opportunity for Eden Prairie residents to address us on issues related to Eden Prairie city government. Our meetings are generally the first and third Tuesdays of each month, and the open podium period of time is from approximately 6:30 to 6:55 here in the council chambers. If you wish to speak at that time and want to be guaranteed a time to speak, please contact the city manager's office at 949-8412 by noon of the meeting date, with your name, your phone number, and the subject matter you wish to discuss. If time permits, after scheduled speakers are concluded, I'll open the floor to other unscheduled speakers. Open podium is not recorded, nor is it televised. Again, if you have any questions, please contact the city manager's office. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
Any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Just a brief council member report item.
And for me as well.
I have one too.
And
Oh
for
my
me as well.
gosh. That's a new one. Okay. All in favor of the agenda as amended?
Aye.
The motion passes. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes from the council workshop held Tuesday, October 2nd?
Move approval.
Second.
Any items to correct? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes from the city council meeting held that same date?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any items to correct there? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. Consent calendar, is there a motion for approval of A through K?
So moved.
Second.
And
Any items to question? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. That brings us to one of a couple of public hearings tonight. This is on Aspire Eden Prairie 2040, which is the name that we have given to our required comprehensive plan that we have been working on for 2 years now.
Yes,
Mr.
Mayor,
Getchell.
Mayor and Council, that is correct. It's at least 18 months, getting close to 2 years. So as council members, you're very familiar with our comprehensive plan update. It's something that's taken up much time in workshop. But now we've reached a point after 18 months of community engagement, research, discussion, we have a draft plan. And the draft plan's actually been available for comment for quite some time and is still available for comment through the end of November. But tonight we have a presentation and a public hearing and a requested action on behalf of the City Council to move this comprehensive plan forward. We have, boy, I don't know who's going to go first. We have both the city planner, Julie Klima, and John Houseseal with Houseseal Levine, our consultant, both part of a presentation this evening. Then we will hold a public hearing and ask the council to take action. So I guess, Mayor, if that's okay, I would turn it over to Julie first.
Members of the council, we're happy to be before you this evening to present the draft plan of Aspire Eden Prairie 2040. As Mr. Getchell alluded to in his comments, it's been a bit of a time in coming, and the Planning Commission and City Council have essentially worked as a steering committee through that 18-month to 2-year process. In addition to that, the city has, as Mr. Getchell mentioned, had a very robust and dynamic community engagement process. But the plan that we have before you this evening is one that was reviewed by the Planning Commission at a public hearing at their September 24th meeting. They did recommend approval to the City Council unanimously. So this evening I would like to, along with Mr. Houseseal, go through the plan, overview the process briefly, go through the plan chapter by chapter to review those highlights, and then talk about next steps with you, and then ask that the public hearing proceed in order to get comment and feedback from you as well as the community at large. So the planning process that we have gone through as a city with the mandated comprehensive plan update, as we talked about, began 18 months to 2 years ago. We initiated that project. There was very robust and dynamic community engagement. There was a lot of outreach to community members on specific topics, as well as topics at a large scale in order to get that feedback. We've also taken a look at existing conditions in the community as well as special area studies in order to develop that draft plan. And through that process, the information that was provided through that feedback as well as the conversations and direction that has been received by the City Council and Planning Commission has been incorporated into that draft plan. As you're familiar, the organizational structure of the plan includes the plan chapters that are noted on this slide. Those are largely the required elements that Met Council has asked all communities to provide within their documents. The items identified as plan callouts on your slide are something that are more of a local flavor. They represent community initiatives that largely were heard through the community feedback, and that feedback really aligned with a lot of the initiatives that the city is already undertaking with regard to sustainability and diversity and community health. So you'll see information on those topics integrated throughout the entire plan in all of the chapters. So the Eden Prairie Today chapter is really the introductory chapter to the plan. It provides a snapshot of where Eden Prairie is at today and takes not only a look at the physical development, but also the contributing plans and studies and policy direction that you see throughout the plan. So on this slide, you'll see just a sampling of all the documents that were used to inform the draft plan through that process. In addition, the community outreach results really reflect the voices and the desires of what we heard from the Eden Prairie residents and community at large through those outreach efforts, whether those were online engagements, meeting with community groups, DIY meetings that folks took back to their homeowners association or their church groups and provided that feedback to us. So all of that information has really been folded into this document to represent the community's needs over the long term. The Eden Prairie Tomorrow chapter is probably the briefest chapter in the document, and it really serves as a vision statement for the community looking out to 2040. It identifies what characteristics of Eden Prairie make it a community of choice and what we can do through the implementation of Aspire in order to retain that status. And then as we move into the more topical chapters of the document, that's where we get into more of the substance that you'll see. So the land use chapter, as you're all familiar with, guides properties for land use and development type within the community. This draft plan has roughly 15 to 20 land use categories. Some of them are holdovers from the old plan. Some of them have been tweaked with a new name to reflect changing and evolving development trends. Some of them are brand new, like the eco-innovation land use category that is intended to address the former Flying Cloud landfill and proposed uses long-term on that site. Another new aspect to the land use chapter from the plan back in 2008 is to identify specific properties for transit-oriented development, because as you'll remember back at that time, the alignment for the LRT was not defined at that point. So we are now taking a more proactive approach with regard to that. In addition, the other new piece is parcel-specific vision. So there are certain properties that the city has identified for particular uses, whether that's an opportunity site for hotel development with meeting space, or whether it's a mixed-use development that could be either mixed-use vertically or horizontally. So there is some very parcel-specific direction provided in that chapter as well. The housing and residential areas chapter takes a look at the current inventory of the community's housing stock as well as the projected needs of the community, and how do we get at those life cycle needs for housing in order to serve the population throughout their life, so that folks don't have to leave Eden Prairie to get the type of housing product or style that they desire. So in addition to looking at that, the chapter also examines how to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in order to fulfill those life cycle housing needs. As you well know, the Planning Commission and Council have also talked recently about an inclusionary housing policy, and as a group, you have provided direction back to staff. Staff is continuing to work on drafting that inclusionary housing policy, and will likely have that back before you for your review and comment shortly. But that is one of the implementation strategies that is identified in the housing chapter as to a measurable thing that can be done in order to try and achieve those housing goals as we look to implement Aspire 2040. The economic competitiveness chapter is a new requirement of the Met Council. While it's a mandated chapter, it doesn't require a lot of specific detailed information. So Eden Prairie really took this as an opportunity to identify and bolster our policies on economic competitiveness. Knowing that we're an employment hub within the region, we want to be able to retain that status over the long term, and so we took a good, long, hard look at what do we have now, what makes it successful, and how do we continue to provide that level of success. So that's the kind of detail you'll find in that chapter.
All right, moving along to the next couple. For the record, John Houseo with Houseo Levine Associates. The transportation section was prepared by SRF Consulting. It's an engineering and planning firm. The city contracted separately with them to do a transportation master plan parallel to the comprehensive planning effort. So we've been working in tandem with city staff and SRF to make sure we touch points throughout the process and to make sure the comprehensive plan reflects the engineering and transportation and accessibility chapters as dictated by their plan. Right now, that plan chapter primarily contains aspects of roadways, bike and pedestrian facilities and mobility, freight, and aviation. With regard to roadways, it really focuses on clarifying changes to some of the collector streets and coordinating all recommendations from past planning corridor studies that have been done over the years and pulling those all together into the comprehensive plan. With regard to bikes and pedestrians, it really looked at two different things, and that was making sure you had a complete and fully integrated and a sort of a connected system within Eden Prairie, and then that need to connect to the larger regional bicycle transportation network that is being built and exists within the larger area around Eden Prairie, so both the local and the regional efforts. Freight, we really looked at mapping the heavy commercial average annual daily traffic for both principal arterials and A minor classifications systems within the city itself. And for aviation, we really talked about providing the boundaries and the access issues with regard to the airport. Next one. Community facilities is a unique part of a comprehensive plan in as much that a big part of comprehensive planning is land use, private property, a lot of it, and transportation systems. But community facilities is key because it contributes so much to the quality of life in the community. The schools, the parks, the police, the fire, the public safety, the heritage sites. These are all under the domain of public or semi-public institutions or organizations. So community facilities are really in part of what makes a community great, and Eden Prairie has some great facilities. So the two primary themes here were, the first of all was to make sure that everybody had access to and had a high level quality of service to all the different public offerings that the city had to offer through public facilities and services, and to make sure that was openly accessible to everybody in the community. And the other one was to really focus in on protecting, identifying, and preserving and holding as important the heritage sites throughout the city of Eden Prairie. Next is open space, and open space, parks and recreation. This is the type of your city, a part of your city that, like transportation, often has more detailed planning studies done just for parks and recreation. And one of the hallmarks of Eden Prairie is its natural setting. Your open space, your parks, your heavily wooded areas is absolutely beautiful. And it's what distinguishes you from other parts or other communities within this region. So you've got parks, you've got open space, you've got natural resources, you've got heritage sites, you've got conservation areas, you've got recreational trails. All of these things are represented in the Parks and Open Space chapter. And again, one of the key caveats, like public facilities, is to ensure that everybody, every resident, every member of this community has access to these great parks, open space, and natural features. And then another emphasis of this chapter was to expand the trail network that you have here, increasing recreational and personal mobility for everybody walking and biking on trails throughout the beautiful natural areas in the open space. The next thing is water resources and infrastructure. And there may be no other chapter of a comprehensive plan that requires much more detailed level of analysis outside of the comprehensive plan. We're talking about engineering, public works, utilities, infrastructure, stuff below the ground. This is the stuff that really makes your city work or not work. It's not the stuff that's obvious to people. And because of that level of attention and intricacy in making it work, it is a concentrated effort beyond the comprehensive plan. But here we really wanted to make sure that with regard to the water resource and infrastructure, is right now Eden Prairie staff, city staff, is working to address some edits proposed by Met Council in their first review of the draft. And a lot of the new stuff in this chapter addresses some sewer system issues within the city. And some of those regard to forecasting for housing and employment sector areas with regard to sewer systems, and to identify requirements and mitigation for strategies for existing trunk sewer systems right now within the city. So again, these are things that as we look at areas of the city to grow, to change, to see redevelopment, we need to make sure that these areas are served by water and sewer and other infrastructure, but the detailed work is done outside of the comprehensive plan by city staff. We want to make sure we dovetail those efforts in the comprehensive plan.
As a part of the overall Aspire effort, city staff also identified 2 areas within the community that required a bit of a deeper dive to understand what should that development or that area look like, either when it matures or when it grows up, basically. So those 2 areas were the Martin Drive area and the Crosstown Industrial area. And as a part of those specialized studies, what happened in each area was an identification of the functional areas of those 2 properties and taking a look at what's the environment around it, what are the uses that are there today, what are the market trends in order to make sure that whatever recommendations are made are feasible long-term in the marketplace. And then taking all of that information and arriving at some near-term recommendations on how to improve those areas, and also taking a look at long-term recommendations in the event of a more complete redevelopment of the area. So the nearly final chapter in the comp plan does identify very specific action items or suggestions for those 2 particular areas, including providing a scale of massing of how that development could look, and you'll see those graphics in the development chapter.
And the last chapter in any comprehensive plan that we work on in most communities is the implementation chapter. When a comprehensive plan is developed and adopted, it's not the end of the planning process, it's sort of the beginning of implementation. A comprehensive plan is a 10 to 20 year document, and the implementation is not tomorrow. It starts tomorrow, but it goes for a decade plus. And as you look at different recommendations of the plan, some things may be able to be fixed or addressed with zoning. Some things may be able to address with sort of pre-prioritization of capital improvement or infrastructure expenditure. Some things may be a policy basis, some things may be a different type of analysis or recommendation in a further study. The implementation chapter is meant to provide direct actions that the city should take, who it should partner with, the different initiatives that should be taken. This can manifest as a CIP recommendation, a zoning or development control recommendation. It could be a different way of approaching development in the future in terms of a procedure. This begins to identify what should be done, the city's role in getting that accomplished, who it ought to be partnering with, and different ways that they can begin to implement the plan incrementally over time as opportunity presents itself. And it's usually the last chapter, and it's the last chapter of the plan that's always written, because we have to see what the final recommendations are before we can write the implementation for those recommendations. Part of this chapter will include a detailed matrix that will allow you to sort of look in the left column, see the action and recommendation, and then look across in the subsequent row to see exactly how that implementation item ought to be implemented over time. So we make it as clear as possible. Sort of a menu-driven approach to allow the city to track more effectively if they're moving the needle or not and having the desired change they want to have over time.
So with regard to next steps, the Met Council with this round of comp plan updates has implemented a new strategy where city staff can submit the draft plan and they'll provide preliminary comments in order to allow time for staff and their consulting teams to finalize and refine those plans prior to formal submittal. So Eden Prairie has taken advantage of that. We've gotten comments back from Met Council, and we're continuing to work with House Seal and other city staff in order to address the comments that have been provided thus far by the Met Council. In addition, the plan is out for its 6-month review period. That does expire at the end of November. So either when that time frame expires or we've received comment from all affected jurisdictions, we'll provide a response to those comments and we'll be able to formally submit the comp plan to Met Council for their review at that point. So at this time, until all of those comments are received, the latest we would estimate that the comp plan is submitted to Met Council for review is early December, which is ahead of their December 31st deadline. So with that, we are open to any questions that you might have. And
I have one question. If public comment is open until the end of November, but we're being asked for approving the plan tonight, that doesn't seem like we're
So-
approving something that might ostensibly change.
The overall general direction of the plan is expected to remain the same. The comments that are being provided, we've got probably about 30% of those comments that have been received back from other jurisdictions and agencies, and largely those comments are either we have no further comment or we'd like you to inform us when you're going to be making this roadway improvement and trail construction. And as a part of the overall process, we have to provide those comments to Met Council so they can see them, and staff will be providing responses to those. Either that change was made into the plan or we've received your comment as noted, things of that sort.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Nelson.
I've got a couple of things. I don't know if it's enough to hold up the passing for it, but there was a couple of questions in housing, which was sort of one of the last ones that we reviewed. And a couple of things. One was we looked at a lot of places where they were expiring for affordability and by 2040, but in actuality, a lot of them expire in 2026 and 2027, which is a much more immediate issue. So at least we would put onto our work plan, if not the comp plan, that needs to be looked into. Also, there was, on page 79, there was major rehabilitation of existing buildings where they're likely to cause substantial rent increases. I agree with that, but the caveat to that is how do we mandate buildings meeting our quality standards with that in there? Because we do want them to keep the building up to snuff and yet not have to raise rents excessively. So I don't want it to make buildings where it's a cheap cost for a very not so great building. And something that was brought up just at our last workshop was exploring the creation of ways to retrofit and rehab existing home floor plans. That's on a blue sidebar, but I would hope we would take that whole idea and move it along as a future thing to look at, perhaps. And we did discuss that before, and I was glad to see that in the sidebar. But these things do, go into a few new things that staff was going to need to look at. But there's enough in the plan so that they could. But I at least wanted to mention those things, as things to think about with what we've got written.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, all three of the items noted by Councilmember Nelson, I would expect fall within the implementation strategy chapter and the matrix that Mr. Houseel talked about. They may not be things that are completely defined within the comp plan policy document, but as part of the implementation over the next decade or more, we would be looking at ways to see those things come to fruition.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much. A ton of work went into this, and we appreciate all the effort of you and your staff. You spent a lot of time in Eden Prairie over the last couple of years, and appreciate all of the members of the public who participated in some of our meetings to provide input on the plan, and people who made comments. All of that helps to make this a better and better document. Thank you, Julie.
And if I can say, Madam Mayor, we work all over the country, and your staff here is exceptional. You may already know that.
We do.
You probably do. But we had the privilege of working with staff from every department as we developed this plan. And I can say that across the full spectrum of regardless of what department we had the privilege of working with. But Julie and her team just did a fantastic job. Julie's the one we worked most closely with throughout this process. And she held our feet to the fire and was there every step of the way and then some. And I just wanted to, hats off to this city for having the staff they do, because it's a standout nationally from a lot of the places we work, and I just wanted you to know that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And don't try to recruit them.
Yeah.
All right. Is there a motion?
No, this is a public
Oh, this
hearing.
is a public hearing. Yes. Is there anyone from the audience that wants to address the council on Aspire, our new comprehensive guide plan?
Seeing none, I move to close the public hearing and adopt the resolution approving Aspire Eden Prairie 2040 and authorizing submittal to the Metropolitan Council.
Second.
Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. 2018 special assessments, Mr. Getchell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is an annual event. Once a year, toward the end of the year, the City Council needs to hold a public hearing to consider levying all the various special assessments throughout the year. You'll see in the packet all the individual assessments are listed. The majority this year are actually tall grass and weed removals. There are a few development assessments, but actually very few. And so the list is pretty brief this year, but either way, we ask that you take action to hold a public hearing, approve the assessments, and then those would get sent on to the county to be levied.
Okay. The assessments total about $18,000, if I recall correctly. Is there anybody from the audience that wants to address the council on these assessments? See no one. Is there a motion?
I would move to close the public hearing for the approval of the 2018 special assessments and adopt the resolution approving all special assessments presented in the fall of 2018.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. The next item is payment of claims. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any items to question? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Aho,
Aye.
Councilmember Butcher Workstrom,
Aye.
Councilmember Case,
Aye.
Councilmember Nelson,
Aye.
Mayor Tara Lukens.
Aye. Next section is reports, the reports of council members, and the first item we have is the Kopeski edition of a trail. Mr. Getchell, did you want to introduce that?
I can do that, Mayor. Thank you. You may recall at the last council meeting on council member reports, you asked the staff to go back and look into the trail that was part of the Kopeski edition in early 2017. So as part of that development, the city council requested a trail edition. You've since heard residents at Open Podium and contacting you by other means requesting that the city not construct that trail. So the options that we are bringing back are to either reaffirm the decision and move ahead with the trail extension, to completely eliminate the trail, vacate the easement, amend the development agreement, and remove all record of the trail possibly being put in. And then the third option is to actually maintain the easement, maintain the plat, we'd actually have to amend the development agreement, but you would defer the installation of the trail. So there could be a future time where the city could come back, whether it be for a future group of residents or the neighborhood at a future date, could construct the trail. I would say that in that third option too, we would not hold an escrow. We would deal with the construction, which is not a large expense, but we would deal with that at a later date. The other follow-up, Mayor, would be, and council members, was to look into any safety concerns that were brought up. So there in the packet, you'll see there's quite a bit of police analysis and safety analysis done. That's in the packet, and our conclusion is that the having the trail located there does not have a safety concern, and the data doesn't kind of support those situations, along with other examples. There are actually quite a few examples in the city where we have trails that connect to the end of cul-de-sacs and other trails. So there's actual visual examples of similar developments. So we wanted to kind of come back with some evidence that shows that we have done this in other locations and safety isn't a concern. But that being said, this is completely your decision and you have options to consider. And obviously, you've also heard from the neighborhood. So that material from the neighborhood is in the packet as well.
Okay, before I open it up to council, a question for you, because in an open podium, that issue of escrow was brought up. If we went with option 3, which is to maintain the trail easement, defer possible construction, why would we not keep the escrow that we currently have? Otherwise, it's, instead of the developer paying for the trail, it would be all of the rest of the citizens of Eden Prairie, the residents of Eden Prairie paying for it. Theoretically, a businessman would put the cost of that trail dispersed among the cost of the lots that they're building. So I don't understand why we would return it.
There's two comments maybe. One would be, I think we've estimated the amount to be somewhere less than $10,000. So it's not a large amount. And in the time frame, we can certainly do this, but typically when we have escrows or securities, it isn't indefinite. So there may be an issue with 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but you're right, Mayor, there would be a cost to the city, not to the developer, if we were not to escrow. I think, and we can go either way, but I think the feeling is, you know, we can, in terms of the cost of our trail system and what we maintain and what we expand on our trail system, this wouldn't have an effect on our budget at all.
Okay. So it's more of a principle of the thing.
I would say so, yes.
Is it a possibility to treat it like we do cash park fees, where it goes towards a pool of money to be used for development of other trails, rather than that specific trail?
Possibly, or we could establish, you know, some dollar amount that the city could receive. You know, like you said, I think this is what you're saying, some dollar amount that's commensurate to the construction of that trail to be used somewhere else now, but maybe in the future that this trail could get built, you could do that.
By us,
right?
yeah.
So we have to, if you choose to, like option 3, for instance, which is to maintain the easement, defer installation, we have to amend the development agreement, and I believe the city attorney can weigh in. That needs to come back at a future council meeting, so we could work out the details based on council feedback.
Option 2, you said?
Option 3.
Option 3, okay. All right, council members, comments, proposals. Councilmember Aho, I think you were first.
Yeah, so as many of us have done, I went out there and looked at it, met with the residents and looked at the actual trail location. And I mean, in general, I am very supportive of the city maintaining our trail system and the connectivity, and I think that is very critical and important to having a good trail system, one that's comprehensive and connects all the trails. In this particular case, where you're connecting just a sole cul-de-sac, a small neighborhood, it's not really, doesn't impact the connectivity of our overall trail system. I don't think it's that critical. If the neighbors were split on whether or not they wanted it, I would say absolutely, we're going to do it. But when the vast majority don't want it, I mean, the whole purpose of our trails is to serve our residents, and if the residents don't want it, why are we doing it? And so, but I think the third option with deferring the installation and keeping the easement there makes sense, because who knows, like we had discussions before, maybe at some future date, some of our residents would say that new residents move in there and they say, well, why aren't we connected here? Why don't we have a trail here? We'd like it. We could use that, or not us probably, but a future council could use that and say, yeah, I think that makes sense. We'll be happy to put that in. We've got the easement there, but I think it should be neighborhood driven by the residents, not the city saying we want to go and do this at a future date and the city driving it. But I'd like to see it driven by the residents of that neighborhood. So I would certainly support option 3, and so maintaining the easement and deferring the installation.
Okay. Councilmember Case, you were next.
Yeah, so I'm just going to clarify, Brad, a couple of thoughts. I'm not going to disagree with what you said, but I'm going to clarify a nuance, I think, of what you said. I think our trails are for everyone, not, and I know you didn't say this, so I'm clarifying. I think our trails are for everyone, not just that neighborhood or any neighborhood. And I know you didn't mean this, so I'm just clarifying for the good of everyone else. I think that every project that we look at, we should entertain the opinions of those contiguous around, but not drive our decision, because our decision, and I know you agree with that, because our decisions are for the good of all, and then we look at mitigating negative impacts on contiguous neighbors. At least that's my philosophy. So in this case, and I'm going to agree with you again, Brad, that I don't think the value has been shown to be for everyone else. And when I initially proposed this trail, and I'll own it, I was not thinking of it for the city. Some trails I would be thinking of that. I was thinking of it for the good of the neighbors. I really truly thought the neighborhood would want this, because I live on a cul-de-sac where my neighborhood would wish, I mean, like crazy, that some council in the late 80s and early 90s connected our neighborhood to the two other neighborhoods near us. So I was making an assumption that has turned out to be false. That's why I'm okay with option 3, because it allows these neighbors who have clearly expressed that they don't want it in this moment, but it doesn't impact our doing the best on behalf of future people that live there. And I want to make sure that the option and the right-of-way remains open. The escrow piece is interesting to me. I'm a little bit ambivalent on that, but I guess I would lean toward escrowing, I suppose. And whether that would be, you know, again, I don't care. I don't even know if it's legal to lock it up for 10 years or 15 or indefinitely, or take the money now and spend it right now on parks, knowing that in a way we got it, you know, and so then whenever the trail gets built, in a way we already got the money and we go use it. So I'm okay with that. I do think it would be somewhat disingenuous or duplicitous if we did not take the money, because we're saying we value the trail, we believe it should be built eventually. We're going to defer out of respect for the current neighborhood, because at least that's why I proposed it, was to address the needs of these neighbors who have come to us and said they don't want it. If it had any positive impact on the rest of the city, I would not have been changing my mind, because again, it's the good of all. I think that takes precedence, and then you mitigate the negative impacts on contiguous neighbors. So I'm okay with option 3. I'm okay with the escrow in some fashion. That's just my opinion. I'll hear from others.
Councilmember Nelson.
I happen to agree with option 3. I lived in a neighborhood that did have a short connection onto another trail. And when the kids were little, you sort of wondered about that. But as they got to be junior high age, say, and they were old enough to go out on trails a little further, it was nice to have a connection where they didn't have to ride on the street to get it, I must admit. I like your idea of at least taking the money and put it into trails, and take some future money and put it back into this. I would definitely see a time when the neighborhood would come back to us and say, by the way, we would like to do that trail. And in the meantime, I think we should take an opportunity to perhaps do a pollinator flower mix into the trail, so it's not just dirt sitting there or weeds, to try to at least do something that would have a little beneficial for the city as well as the neighborhood. Doesn't look that great when it's just, you know, lots and lots of weeds sitting there. So I think 3 is the way I would like to head.
Okay. Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom.
Right, well, it appears that we're all, well, the 3 of us anyway, are in agreement. It makes sense to me to do this. We make this commitment to do this trail connection, and things may change in the future. So I think, may change in terms of the view of the neighborhood. So I think maintaining the easement is very important. And I also think the idea of escrowing, which is a really good idea, possibility of using it on something else, makes sense. So I'm going to go with number 3 as well.
Okay. Well, then I'm really in the minority. I asked the question about the escrow just for clarification, not because that was really what I wanted to do. Some of the reasons that were given for not having this trail have been things like, it's not really necessary. Well, none of our trails are really necessary. They're all just a part of a system that we've developed and we're working to develop. And in fact, our residents, through this whole Aspire process, through our bike and pedestrian planning that we did probably 6-8 years ago, have reinforced these are a critical part of our community. People want them. They want them for safety reasons. They want them for exercise reasons. We know that this is not a unique type of cul-de-sac trail going onto a bike trail. We've had countless examples, and it's not an exhaustive list that they included in our packet tonight. Safety concerns were given as a reason for this, and we're finding from the data that we've been supplied by public safety that in fact there are no problems with this type of trail. There are no increased risks of burglary, residential auto tampering, stolen vehicles, et cetera. So safety is not the reason. This is not their trail, just as the trail that's near me is not my trail. It's a trail for the community. It's for future owners that want to get out to the bike trail safely, because going down West 82nd Street where there's no bike trail is not a safe way to access the Dell Road bike trail. It's a way for friends of the children within these two cul-de-sacs that both could use this very easily. It's a way for children to come in and visit their friends in a safe manner and not have to ride their bike down West 82nd Street. We saw comments tonight, and I think I already said this, in the Aspire program about how much this is important to people within our community to increase the amount of trails. And I question, in the future, how do we counter the next request from a neighborhood that says, we want no trail here? We want no trail at the end of our cul-de-sac. We want no trail along one side of our road. Because the reasons that they've given us for not having a trail here are not substantiated by public safety statistics. So are we just going to rely in the future on whatever a neighborhood votes in terms of what their trail, whether they should have a trail or not? I don't think that's the vision that we've had for our community for years and years, either from staff or from our public. So my vote would be to reaffirm our decision to install the trail extension. But I seem to be in a minority. Mr. Case.
You and I don't often vote separate, but
I know.
5 or 6, I think, through the years that I can recall. I agree with you that precedent is always an issue. I do think this time we've been clear that, at least I hope I've been clear, and I think I've heard it in others, that the number one driving reason for me putting this trail would be the good of everyone else. So if a future development comes to us and there's a trail that's going to be connected that clearly has value to public, to other cul-de-sacs, to our entire bike system, then we do it. I mean, and I think it's very clear, and you and I both know too that council's changing. What we did in the 90s, no one remembers, nor will they. I mean, so the precedent piece is based on the people that happen to be sitting there. I do appreciate this council, or the ones of us left after you guys leave, sorry, will need to maybe face this, in the next couple years. And I do believe, again, if the good of all is present, then that will be the most important piece. I wanted to clarify one thing, that just to make sure if we do end up voting this and it goes forward, as that there's no consensus to put flowers and bee pollen. And the only reason I say that is that on any of our city property that goes between various houses, including the one that I've been involved with, the neighbors on either side simply take care of it. I mean, we don't want a dirt. I'm just pointing out that I don't think that was coming out of all of us. That we don't want a dirt path, or we don't want mandatory flowers in there, or something that the 2 yards will just come together. Trees cannot be planted because there's sewer, water, electrical, everything's going down either side of that right-of-way. So that right-of-way will have to stay as is, just in grass. And I'm assuming the 2 yards would simply mow to the middle like we all do with our right-of-ways. And so I just wanted to clarify there, just so it wasn't a mandatory planting. It was a good idea, though, flowers and things like that. But
And would this be marked with creosote markers so that no fences would be built in the area?
so we don't.
I don't think we normally mark.
We do a lot.
easements.
We do a lot, but we don't, like the area that's the, I don't know if infamous is the right word, but with the outlot that we've had, the trails with the kayak going through. So Carsonite markers mark the entire, say what?
They're not creosote, yeah.
Oh.
I said creosote, yeah.
That's all right. We all knew what you meant. Carsonite markers mark that whole outlot area, and they're about every 30 to 40 feet, something. They may even be in lot line corners, but I do not believe they mark the trail, Jay. Is that correct? And I don't think. I mean, we're pretty careful that the purpose of our Carsonite markers, besides just keeping people out of public right-of-way, is really so they exactly encroachment. And in this case, we're not as concerned about the encroachment piece as we are like with no touch outlots that have trees or something like that. I think. So I don't think we would typically mark this with Carsonite markers. Jay has his hand up too, but go ahead. Nope, you. No,
Yeah,
I'm not calling on him.
Nobody hit their button, so.
Your Honor,
words
council
tonight.
members, our standard practice is to mark these sections. Also, Councilmember Case referring to Red Rock. There's 3 narrow parcels or narrow parts of that parcel that touch different streets, and on all 3 of those, we do mark it at the street on both sides, and it's maybe about 20 feet wide, 10 to 20 feet wide at each of those. There's a couple just down the street, Pheasant Woods Park. There's a couple of areas going in that it isn't a paved trail, but it is that what if you just stood there, you would see 2 mowed lots coming together. There are a couple of the signs and posts there, and we don't see a lot of infringement on that where people are building. It's usually the backyards. It's not the side yards that we have the encroachment on, but typically we have marked those, and I don't know that it's not a policy, it's more of a practice. We have marked all of our boundaries and made it clear that that's, even though neighbors do mow between them, and we do rely on that, that is an important piece for them. If it's not a trail and it is going between 2 lots, that is something that generally each neighbor mows to the middle of it. It's not usually a very wide strip, kind of like we're talking about here, but our standard practice has been to put the markers in.
All right, is there a motion?
I would move to maintain trail easement, defer the installation of the trail to an undetermined future date, and amend the development agreement to relieve the development. I don't want to do that. Defer the installation of the trail to an undetermined future date and escrow the funds for the future for the building of the trail. And I'm going to stop right there before anyone seconds it and help me. Do we want it to be indefinite? Do we want to, is the implication we could take the money now? Do you want to help me and then I'll clarify and finish my motion?
What I can help with is maybe you just want to end with amend the development agreement, because between now and when we bring the development agreement back, we may have an escrow deal worked out. They may wish to pay directly.
Perfect.
But so I get your feedback in terms of wanting to be compensated for the trail, so we'll figure that out.
So I would end it off with amend the development agreement.
Correct.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. All right. Councilmember Case, you had a report.
Yeah, actually, Brad and I both at different times had visited this site. It's on Scenic Heights out toward 212 and Dell. And I like when I come across individual homeowner issues that have a broader implication for the whole city. I kind of like to bring that back and ask questions and maybe even have staff come back with some idea or some recommendation on it. So the issue is that when that huge mound along Scenic Heights on the south side of 212 was built, between Scenic Heights and 212, so we're west of 4 going towards Dell.
By Big Woods.
Yes.
Okay.
And French Curve is the last street that intersects it there. That mound is a tremendous sound barrier. And the mound was extended pretty far, but like another 50, 70 feet beyond French Curve. And then it drops off quickly, and then it drops down to, because there's an entry ramp onto 212. It could have continued. Supposedly, according to the homeowner I talked to, when they were talking to head of MnDOT, you know, it's like they ran out of time, money, dirt, whatever, and that's possible, right? But, because I don't remember any of the plans in that kind of a detail that we were looking at, and I don't know that we would have even approved that. So what the deal is that that opens up this tremendous gap of sound coming through. So here's my question, and I'd like to throw this out to staff and maybe just have Robert or somebody at some point, and Brad, you can weigh in here too, because I know you went out there, just come back with what happens in situations like this, where it's a state highway, where there's the potential for sound wall. I know MnDOT's out of money probably, but they build sound walls across the state. We know, I was gonna say I'm sure they have criteria. We know they have criteria. My question would be, have the metrics changed? Because when the criteria were, when this road was first built, the traffic's probably triple what it was then. So my question would be, what's the process? So number one, is it worth pursuing, putting forth some kind of an application to MnDOT saying that we want you to investigate and come back and say if this meets metrics, is it possible to have a sound wall to maybe get on a list? Maybe it's a 10-year, I don't know. That's my question, is just what's the process? Because we have situations like this around the city, and we know that, right? And there are areas that need sound walls, and I don't know, once a road is built, I know it's tremendously difficult to get a road in, or to get a wall in next to the road. But I just want to know the process in this case when there's a gap, and there's clearly homes, and I know it's so many feet, and it's decibels, and all that. So that's my, I guess, my request, if others are okay with that as well.
No, and I, like you mentioned, I went there as well, and the noise is pretty significant in that home, and it really is, you know, rather obnoxious, and so I can really see why they're requesting to have an additional sound barrier built in that. And it's not really a long section of road there. It's maybe a couple hundred yards. So it, you know, from a cost perspective, I don't think it would be that, you know, onerous, but you know, as I told them, the residents there, I think what probably has to happen is the MnDOT would have to look at bringing some noise measuring equipment out there, do a little quick study of it, and I know their model is how much do they anticipate would be the noise reduction by an additional wall, and how many residents would it be impact if they were to do that, and I know that's kind of their model. But I think we should start the process with them and see if we can get MnDOT out there to do the study. And I was going to contact some of my MnDOT contacts and see if we could do that. But if we want to drive it from the city as well, I think that's a good thing.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Ellis.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Aho, and Councilmember Case. So we've already initiated that process. We've reached out to MnDOT, anticipating this conversation was going to move forward. So they have agreed to put their instrumentation out there to collect the data for noise, and then they can review that. Is this about where they projected when they were designing Highway 212? Does this meet the threshold for a noise barrier? And then ultimately, how does this fit within their priority of other noise barriers? So a lot of questions beyond that, but they've at least offered to place the instrumentation, collect the data. They said they were hoping to get that in before the end of the construction season, but it sounds like they're definitely working towards collecting the data. So
Thank you. Good.
Thank you.
That's a positive step forward. Thank you.
Do you have something else, or was it the same issue?
No, that was one of the issues. The other issue was regarding the Shields, the new Shields store. So obviously they're under construction at the site, and as you know, there's a fence all around the site. And so, as you've seen in many construction sites, the new owner or whoever is doing the construction, a lot of times they'll put a wrap around the fence. You know, it kind of looks a lot better than having just this chain link fence. And it can also provide some signage that would indicate what's going into that location. Because frankly, a lot of people, even though it's been broadcast numerous times, they don't know what's going in there. And, you know, people, and when it'll be done, and what's, you know, what really is happening there. And there's also some confusion when people are driving around that site and they see all this construction happening, and they don't really know where they can go into the mall. Are the entrances that they would expect to be open, are they open? Is something closed? They really don't know. So I think we need some navigational aids there as well, some wayfinding aids. And so the proponent of the project, Shields, and the mall have been working with our staff to try to get some wraps around that. But what they've really encountered is a little bit of a barrier in that our staff is saying, well, you know, we don't like this wrap because your logos are larger than what the signage allows for the building. And so I don't know what we need to do to allow something like this to take place, but whether it's a change in our sign ordinance, you know, for a temporary sign during construction, or is it some kind of a variance process, or do we just allow it? How do we handle these temporary construction projects and allow them to put the signage that are the wrap around there that really makes it, makes it understandable what's happening there? I think it'll beautify the construction site as much as you can. I mean, it's still a construction site, but it should help. And so how do we accomplish that? Because I really think that that it's important for the business. I mean, Shields is spending a lot of money to develop this site, and it'd be nice if people coming to the area would know that a Shields store is coming in here, and maybe know that people that aren't familiar with what is Shields, maybe if they could have something that would, you know, show people riding bikes, or kayaking, or fishing, or something that would be using their products, show that on their banner. But right now they're really seeing it as they're not being allowed to do what they need to do to get it done.
So they're not being allowed to even put up a sign, a wrap that would be all sports figures?
So I'll show you some examples of some of the, I don't know, I didn't email this to everyone, but I don't know if you can kind of see this, but these are 50-foot long banners that they've potentially designed as options, and you can see these have wayfinding built into them, and because their name is maybe larger than what our signage allows, because think of 50-foot banners and think of more than 1,000 feet of fencing that they have to cover, so they're going to be putting those up all along. Then each one of those signs would be larger than what we allow.
Oh, they probably want to leave them up all year then, all that advertising.
Well, what's interesting...
I don't know. Why do they have to have shields on every
Well, I
one
was just going to say, what's interesting, at first when you were saying, I was assuming like they already have this wrap that they've purchased, they use when they build. But they can design anything. Mm-hmm. They can design software, they don't need the sign on there. So I would suggest they very easily could keep within our sign ordinance, have shields on there, but they just don't have to have 50-foot long shield signs on there.
Well, they're not 50-foot long shields.
But larger than our sign ordinance.
50-foot long banners, but it does say shields on each one of the 50-foot banners.
And how many 50-foot banners?
I don't know how many 50-footers there are. Nancy, do you have any idea how many there are? 2,500 feet of fence, so a lot of fence.
Wow.
Wow, no.
Yeah, that's...
I don't like this idea. I love the idea of wayfinding. I love the idea of a barrier that's colorful that will kind of speak to what Shields does, but I don't think it's necessary to have Shields' name 250 times.
I think we'd be opening up a can of worms too, because like, think about the Elevate project. If we start to allow whatever, I mean, pictures and and it might be beautiful for a little bit, but we've got construction going on around the city. I think we'd want more conversation on this one.
Could it be informational? I mean, could they put at least, when it's going to open so people will know when the construction is going
Sure,
to
but yeah, that's not a,
Oh, no.
But Meg probably could meet our sign ordinance and do that, yeah.
Well, I just think that we need to be a little bit more flexible in in allowing them to do something around there that's going to, I mean, right now they've been told that they can't show even products there. So what products they're doing. So, I mean, technically from what, maybe I'm misunderstanding what the ordinance allows and what staff is telling them, but I've been told that they're not allowed to show all the products that that they're selling there that people would be using. So I don't know how that impacts it, but I think, you know, they don't want to just have pictures of scenery, you know, on this banner. They'd like to have some of the product use. So like I say, fishing, you know, hunting.
All the products?
Well, I don't know. They wouldn't have all the products. They wouldn't be able to get them all there.
I mean,
like maybe biking and kayaking, or, you know, some of the products that
But
they have.
would they be putting brands of bikes and brands of
No, I don't think
kayaks?
they would need to have brands. I think it would be just a matter of showing, kind of indicating what they do. So someone looking at this banner would say, "Oh, Shields, they must be into sporting goods." They would at least have an idea of what they're about, and I think that's important.
Ms. Jeremiah?
Your Honor, council members, I just wanted to say that I think we're actually getting very close to agreement with them on being able to wrap that fence. And what we've tried to do is interpret artistic images from commercial advertising. And if you look at Elevate, they have wrapped their fence, and there are images of people sitting outside, and so it is a kind of active images, and it gives a sense of what's going to happen there in the future. And they are allowed to have some commercial signage as well. But the concern is if we just open it up, it's this same kind of temporary signage that we've had issues with, proliferation of leasing signage, et cetera. So we're trying to allow, again, for them to have kind of an artistic look and active images, and also things like the directional signage is looked at separately, what's open, et cetera. So I think we're very close to a compromise. I think there might be some confusion, so we just don't need the names of the canoe and that kind of thing on it, because then we get into advertising.
Sure.
I like the idea of where they're going, but not advertising and not seeing the Shield's name every 50 feet.
Yeah.
That's unnecessary. I'm not even sure that would be positive for them at this point. And but I think something a little less with occasional signs of names, whatever would fit in or what would be typical practice, that's where we should be going. And I like what staff is doing.
Okay, Kathy, you had the next comment.
Yes. Last week I met with the Early Childhood Family, or ECFE, parents group, and was on their agenda to ask what exactly are types of things that they would really like to see from the city. And you've heard me talk often about, what I think are, and I decided, well, maybe other than just some neighbors and this and that, I'd go talk to them. And there were a couple of things they would really like you to know about. One, that there are no such thing as too many little kid swings. When parents go there, they tend to often have two small children, not the same age, but a couple of years apart. And it does cause problems when there aren't one. They want lots of benches around the parks so that they can sit and watch their kids play, and the amount of time that they'd be able to be at the park would be longer if they didn't have to stand there the whole time, and it shouldn't just be picnic benches either. They would like in at least a few of the small kids areas to have foam stuff instead of the wood chips, because they said that little kids often consider wood chips teething toys. I hadn't thought of that one, I must admit. And they'd like signage for bathrooms. And also they like the handicap porta potties, if that's what's there, because the parent can get in with a child or two. And when you're getting out of diapers and training, you sometimes don't have a long time. So that, and plus they said handicapped is good for that. They wanted us to note that all the splash pads are on the west side of town. And in some of the parks on the east side of town, some of those families aren't getting into the car and being park tourists, going from one to one. but they suggest we consider it for something like Nesbitt or Homeward Hills so that it's not everything on the west side. Also, they, and a lot of Eden Prairie residents have talked about all the goose poop around Round Lake. And, I mentioned we had some dog walkers and things. They said that a lot of young parents hate it so much that if they knew if they walked their larger dogs around there it would help, they would do it. And that we need to advertise that a little bit better to the groups that are having the biggest problem with the area, with the walking paths and stuff that their little kids can go to, is not helped by the geese problem. So, and we didn't have a super long time, but those are some of the things that they did mention that they would like to see in addition to what we're doing. They generally like the parks, they like the little kid stuff, and that it wasn't just using it for a couple of years because they often had a couple of kids and it was used over time. And outside of the baseball league stuff, they were some of the biggest users of parks, because it was one of the places you could go with a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old that was free.
Well, thank you. That's good information. I'm sure Mr. Lotthammer is going to absorb all of that. Councilmember Butcher-Wickstrom.
So I have an announcement to make this evening, but before I do, I wanted to thank my family for being here, and some of whom have driven a very long distance to be here. And I also want to thank my dear, dear friends for coming to hear this announcement this evening. So this evening will be my last one on the City Council. I will be leaving my position after nearly 20 years of service and 5 successful campaigns. My sons, Nick and Neil, were 8 and 15 years old when I ran for public office the first time in 1996. And now they are 30 and 37, respectively. I have had the great privilege to sit in the very same seat at this dais for nearly 2 decades, serving with 3 different mayors, 8 different council members, and 4 city managers. Serving on this council has been like living in a family. Ron and Nancy and I have been a part of this family for 20 years. Brad and I for 12, and Kathy and I for 8. With 2 meetings a month and many other city events to attend, that is a lot of time spent in each other's company. As a council family, we have gotten to know each other very well. We've attended weddings, graduations, and birthday celebrations together. We know and understand each other's hopes and dreams, food preferences, and even sports teams that are favored by each of the council members. And just like a family, we don't always agree on issues or ideas, but each of us acknowledges and respects the differences between us. At the end of the day, we are still strong in our friendships and commitment to do the best for the city. I have been honored to work with the sharpest minds and most dedicated hearts. These stellar leaders, past and present, include my great mentor, Dr. Jean Harris, who served the city so well until her death in 2001. Her 10 lessons of life are etched in her memorial bridge at Purgatory Park, and are testimony to the kind of leadership the city has experienced. Over the past 2 decades, the city has grown, changed, evolved, and improved. We've made important decisions that have changed the way the city looks and functions. Eden Prairie is deserving of having the status of #1 city in America. That accolade doesn't come without hard work and vision, dedication, and innovation. Being on the cutting edge is what we are known for and what other cities use as a model. Our residents experience wonderful city services while keeping a lower tax rate. That is an equation every city wants to replicate. So while it is a difficult decision to leave this council a bit early, life circumstances require it. So there are many deserving people I wish to thank. I want to thank the staff for all you have done for the city over the years. I want to especially thank Robert Ellis, Janet Jeremiah, Jay Lodhammer, Joyce Lorenz, Sue Kachiver, David Lindahl, George Espenson, and Greg Weber. My deep appreciation to attorney Rick Russo for your legal advice and for keeping me out of trouble all of these years. I want to thank City Manager Rick Getcho for your exceptional leadership, your collaborative vision, and your friendship. You are the best and the brightest in local government, and you have all been a pleasure to work with. I also want to thank the residents of Eden Prairie for all your support over the years, and I appreciate the many, many conversations we have had while standing in the produce aisle at Cub, watching soccer matches at Flying Cloud Fields, and drinking coffee at Smith's. Please know I will miss you. Finally, I would love to thank my family, sons Nick and Neil, my husband Mark, for allowing me the time to miss literally hundreds of family dinners, events, and occasions. I appreciate your patience in letting me do what has been so important to me. And without your understanding and support, my service would not have been possible. Please know this has been a wondrous journey, and I will miss so many aspects of local government, the problem solving, decision making, and planning for the future. I will especially miss calling bingo at the Lions tent during the 4th of July celebration. I thank you for selecting me to represent you on this journey. It has been my heartfelt honor. Thank you.
Well, I think as you looked out at the audience tonight, you were pretty sure that they weren't all here to hear about Aspire. They were here for you. One of the really unique and wonderful things about working on this council for both Sherry and I, for everybody I think that's here, is that we've been a kind of a consistent group. Other cities are just amazed at the years of experience that this council has together. That has put us in the fortunate situation of not having to say goodbye to people too often. So this is really hard. As you said, we have become like family. We've gone through an awful lot together. We know you. We respect you. We respect your intelligence. We disagree with you sometimes. We talked about that, but that's just what family is all about.
Yes.
And I think that as you look back over the years that you've spent on the council here, the work that you've done with historical sites, you've really educated all of us about all kinds of things historic and archaeological, and we appreciate that. The community center improvements that we did, low taxes, it has always been a big deal for us. The new fire station, the duty crew, AAA bond rating, Eden Gardens, the 2040-15. Through all of this, you have led with integrity. You've had a great perspective that has added so much to this council. You've always been pleasant to deal with. You're so smart, and your dedication to public service is so much appreciated. And in that vein, I would like to read the following proclamation. Whereas Sherry Butcher Wickstrom served the city of Eden Prairie as council member from 1997 through 2008 and 2011 through 2018, and whereas Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom served the community on numerous boards and commissions, including the Eden Prairie Heritage Preservation Commission, the City School Joint Facilities Committee, Advisory Board to the Hennepin South Services Collaborative, Eden Prairie Foundation, Board of Directors for the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust, and Committee for Democratic Government for the National League of Cities. And whereas Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom promoted a lean, efficient government using sound fiscal management to provide excellent services and the best value to Eden Prairie residents. And whereas Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom championed the preservation and protection of Eden Prairie's natural resources and sustainability of its environment. And whereas Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom advocated for a strong park system for the benefit of all residents, and whereas Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom worked diligently to preserve our community's heritage, honor its history, and celebrates its spirit, and whereas Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom represented all sectors of Eden Prairie, regardless of political, religious, or other affiliation, and whereas she played a significant role in making Eden Prairie a vibrant city by supporting initiatives to ensure government accessibility, community safety, and economic success. Now therefore be it resolved that Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom is recognized for nearly 20 years of dedicated commitment to the city of Eden Prairie. And further, the city of Eden Prairie and the City Council does hereby proclaim October 17th, 2018 as Sherry Butcher Wickstrom Day. Hopefully you'll be in town all day in the city of Eden Prairie, and ask the community to join us in thanking Councilmember Butcher Wickstrom for her public service, adopted this day, October 16th, 2018.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Case.
I don't know if each of us are going to say something quick, and I want to make it just fast. I did not write something out. I certainly should have. I'm glad I didn't in a way, because I want to speak from the heart. But you and I go back to the Heritage Preservation Commission, I think 93, for sure 94. I know you helped on my first campaign in 1994, which was a lot of fun, and I met your dad and your boys that were young. You ran in 96. I know that I ended up helping you on that. I think in a nutshell, I was just writing down when you were reading that massive list, that's your legacy, but in a nutshell, your legacy's heart. I mean, you can't think of Sherry without thinking heart. But three things stuck out, and you mentioned them, Nancy, as well, but clearly history, and my love of history has been so constantly integrated and supported with yours, and it's just been a pleasure, and I think Eden Prairie will benefit for decades to come because of the work you did in helping to preserve the history. And I know we each have our love, but you love archaeology and in many cases things under the ground, which I think has been incredible. And I think one thing you've done really well is to remind us that history is not just settler history back to 1852, but it's 10,000 years back to the post-glacier times when the first Native Americans came here. And then absolutely environment. You can't think Sherry without thinking landfill, because you got your political teeth cut on that. And you were a big part of the closing of that landfill. And that's the kind of institutional memory that having people on this council that go back into the 90s, occasionally I'll run, well, not just occasionally, there are many, many people in Eden Prairie that don't know we have a landfill that's been closed, and that's sitting on basically top of a hill overlooking a major river without a liner below. We'll not go there, I digress. But you've been a great part of closing that and making sure that there was the plan to expand that for another 7 to 8 years, and basically your work stopped that. And then the third word I wrote down was diversity, the appreciation and promotion of diversity that you've always had, and that's why you've always been supported by our Hispanic Americans, our Chinese Americans, our Asian Indian Americans, our Somali Americans. They've all loved and supported you, so we're going to miss you.
Ron, I'm going to miss you too.
Kathy?
Yeah, I'd also, one of the newer ones on the board, but I've always benefited from your wisdom and your insight into issues. Thank you for your concern for historic Eden Prairie. You never let any of us forget about it, and that was important. You've always been very kind and concerned for staff, and that's always been something that has been good and kept that going even during some difficult economic times. And so I appreciate that, and I would like you to thank you for all the things you taught me when I was new to the council, and helped me get going and up to, start with other people who had been on so long. And it's been a pleasure to work with you.
It's been a pleasure to work with you too.
Brad?
Well, Sherry, we're going to miss you, but we know that you're going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to be closer to your family, and I think it's going to be a good thing. And so, certainly we'll miss you here in Eden Prairie, but we know that Manio Island is going to benefit from you being there, and so we're thankful for them to be receiving you, but we will miss you here. We've really enjoyed being with you, and I've gotten to know you quite well, and I've really enjoyed it. We've had a lot of fun together with all the meetings, all the events, and it'll be hard without you here.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it very much myself. Thank you.
Yeah.
We plan to go over to Smith after this meeting and have an opportunity to thank Sherry individually and celebrate the end of 20 years of service at that location. But I think that Met Councilmember Jennifer Munt wanted to say a few words, and then we'll adjourn, and everybody will have an opportunity to talk to you at Smith.
Well, Jennifer, how nice.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'm Jennifer Munt. I represent Eden Prairie on the Metropolitan Council. I wanted to be here in person tonight, Sherry, to thank you for your tireless commitment to public service and for your strong support of the Southwest Light Rail line. We promise you one thing. We will do everything within our power to break ground on this light rail line this coming spring. We will have friends and neighbors riding it by 2023. And what you'll find is we will work light rail into the fabric of our lives. I was fortunate to be part of the Hiawatha Light Rail line. My friend Nancy broke water and took the train to Hennepin County Medical Center to have her baby. My friend Matt was married to his wife on the Nicollet Mall station platform.
Kidding.
And I carried my friend George's ashes to Fort Snelling Cemetery on board the train. Trains are not just about infrastructure. They're about connecting people, and they're about connecting our lives. That, I hope, will be part of your proud legacy. We thank you for being a caring, inclusive, dare-to-fail kind of leader. And I want to tell you a secret. I tell all of my relatives that we are the best in the West. And I'm trying to persuade them as I get older to move here near me. No matter where I go, no matter who I talk to, they say, Eden Prairie has a high quality of life, and you're a place where everybody wants to live, work, play, and do business. Thank you for creating that kind of place.
Thank you for coming out
Thank
tonight.
you, Jennifer.
I appreciate it.
Okay, one more round of applause for Sherry before. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Wow, thank you. God.